Awesome. Okay. So I am really excited to be here with all of you today. My name is Trinity Villanueva. I'm going to introduce myself really quickly first, and then I'm going to kind of give it to Ami right after. So my name is Trinity Villanueva. I am the moderator for today's panel, and we're going to be talking about how our mixed racial identities inform our artistry. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. I am currently, I reside on the stolen lands of the Anacostans, also bordering the Piscataway and the Pamunkey peoples. I'm a mixed race woman. I have long, dark brown hair, and I have like golden brown skin with a white background with lots of stuff in the back, and I'm wearing gold hoops. So I'm going to move this forward, and I will hand it off to Ami for her introduction.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having us, Trinity. Hi, everyone. My name is Ami Scherson. I use she, her pronouns. I am a mixed race woman. I am Japanese and Chilean. I am currently located on Lenape land, also known as Queens, New York. I have bleach blonde, long hair, as well as gold hoop earrings. You see that I have a cute little checkered blazer, I don't know what you call this pattern, and then a black top. I'll now pass it off to Nyla.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am Nyla Hasan. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am half Pakistani, half white, and I have fair olive skin with round brown eyes, a bold red lip, a nose ring, brown long hair with bangs. And I'm wearing a long sleeve white collared button down shirt with a white background and a clothing rack behind me. And I currently reside on the Lenape land, also known as Brooklyn. I am a fashion designer by trade, and I've been interested in exploring my multi-layered identities through fashion and storytelling. Thank you.
We'll move it on to Nexus.
Hey everyone, my name is Nexus. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am currently also with Trinity on the occupied and unceded territory of the Anacostans and Piscataway, which a lot of us call Washington, D.C. When we're being polite about the city. Let's see, I have dark brown medium skin, painted nails, a nice dark color. I have a mustache and hair that is covered by a Newsboys hat because Newsies was a very formative musical in my youth. I'm wearing a black tank top with a kind of Philippine crest done in a kind of tribal design. And I am here in my bedroom. There's a dark orange wall behind me and a bunch of moving boxes because I'm getting ready to move. And I am a storyteller, dancer, playwright, working with a playwriting collaborative here in DC called The Welders. And I'll be talking more about that later.
Thank you so much. And to close us out with intros, Jesse.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having this collective space together. Thank you, Mixt Collective, and thank you, Manifest. My name is Jesse Obremski. My pronouns are he, him. I am a Japanese-American performing artist, choreographer, educator, a sing on the side as well, an advocate and director. I am a Gibney Company artistic associate. And I'm a founder and director of RPATS and Obremski Works, my contemporary dance collective. I am seated here on the land of the Lenape people who have been taken, which is named the Harlem in Manhattan. I am wearing I wear Uniqlo all the time. And so I'm wearing a Uniqlo shirt with an orange mountain kind of peak and other mountain peaks as well. There are two windows next to me. There is a white wall behind me. I have black hair, black eyes, and a mustache that will take 5 more years to fully grow out. So it's very, very, very small. And yeah, as you can tell, I'm also a professional fool. And so that should also go into my bio, but I will move up to share it back to Trinity. Thank you so much.
I'm like so excited. I just want to normalize that we are all, living through this crazy time and whatever that means. And I do want to just quickly acknowledge that if you need to go to the bathroom or anything, just do it, okay? And just bring your full authentic self. Ami and I always pride ourselves in wanting to make sure that we do this all the time. If you see me glancing down, it's because I'm looking at notes. I'm going to just start us right off. So I want to make sure that we are all keeping in mind what Mixt Collective is about. We were founded during this pandemic. In the fall of 2020, Ami and I met each other online, and finally we got to meet in person earlier this summer. So we like to say, I guess we're like a baby, like a couple months old. We were just born just recently. So we're still in our infantile stage, but we are a space that defies what mixed race means. We really try to amplify what that means as well, and all mixed race identities, including being biracial, multiracial, a transracial adoptee, and even some third culture kids. So we're a space that is against anti-Blackness rhetoric. We decenter whiteness. We amplify AAPI identities and Indigenous folks, and we definitely uplift and embrace this space in between. So who we all are in this room individually is very different, right? We come from different backgrounds all over the world, our genetic ingredients, but our commonalities are two things, right? And it's being mixed racial identifying and also being artists. And that's what Mixt Collective wants to do. So we wanted to begin with you, Jessie, and to start off with you in this conversation. So how does your mixed identity inform your artistry? And then whoever wants to answer that question and feels comfortable after Jessie, just jump on in.
Yeah, thank you so much. In thinking and responding right now about this question, it brings up a experience that I had maybe 3 years ago. I will say that I'm born and raised in New York City and grew up with a Japanese mother and a white father. And I wanted to grow up learning the language, but there was a speech therapist that said that my brain wasn't computing English and Japanese. And so I didn't grow up learning my Japanese language. And I took it in high school, and I love Duolingo, and so I'm doing Duolingo. And I am not 100% fluid within my Japanese heritage language. And 3 years ago, I was trying to explore the language with someone, and someone had therefore said, because I wasn't speaking fluent and I have a mixed identity with Japanese and American, that I was a fake Japanese person. And that experience, that kind of, I guess, verbal trauma really brings forward this idea where, or in my mind, like, what does a real mixed identity kind of mean? Or like, how do other people then perceive my identity just because of what I can do or what I'm saying or what I can't say? And so that really allowed me to start to initiate thoughts on how I can start to really identify myself much, much more clearly in how I want to be seen. And it allowed me to have more agency in that. And I think that relates to my performance atmosphere and kind of creative space, because my whole life, and potentially all of us are experiencing this, though I will speak from the I, that in my whole life I am experiencing and living within a mixed race identity, and my lifelong experience within that supports me in my artistic practice, because therefore if I'm shifting into a sort of character, I can have the potential empathy of a complex character, a mixed character. It doesn't have to be mixed race character, but a character that has it's way more layered. And I feel that that's within kind of my identity, that I'm way more layered than what I'm perceived by what I can do or what I cannot do. And so I feel that supports me artistically in performance. I would also say that within the events of 2020 and March of 2021, really finding that there's a beautiful responsibility as a mixed race person for me, to speak out and to kind of create spaces where others can feel that. And that's why I love the Mixt Collective, because as an educator, I feel a responsibility to do that for young people who I'm working with. And so that also is informing how I create space for everyone, right? Whether you're mixed race or not, but how I'm creating space, it really informs me in how I am facilitating education. So those, I will just kind of respond firstly in kind of twofold with that.
Does anyone else want to jump in? There's a couple of things that really stood out for me. I guess maybe like a trigger of the fake Japanese thing. I didn't grow up learning how to speak Spanish. Actually, my mix, because I think some of us mentioned it and some of us didn't. I am Puerto Rican, Native Hawaiian, and Filipina. So like just all the islands. And my mother, it wasn't really like, I think, a conscious decision of assimilation, but it was definitely more of like really wanting to make sure that I spoke English and like I don't know, like that default kind of without an accent. So I didn't really learn Spanish until I got older. And I used to have that a lot happen to me. Well, you're not a real Latina. You're fake Puerto Rican, because I wasn't fluent in the language. And still, I get that all the time, like even now in my late 30s, it's like, well, you're not like a real Puerto Rican because you weren't born there, or you're not, and then when I go to Puerto Rico, then I feel disjointed. I don't have that sense of belonging. So I didn't know if anybody else wanted to kind of talk about that sense of belonging within this living in between, and then maybe even how that informs your artistry. So anybody who's open to that.
I would love to jump in. So I recently launched this project. I say it's a project because I really have a hard time with saying it's a fashion brand, because I want it to be so much more than that. And it's called The Other. And I'd say recently, as in the last like 4 years, I really came into my own as owning my mixed identity. And because I always felt like I wasn't enough South Asian or enough of my white identity, and also being Muslim. And so, the sense of belonging I never really had, living in both Pakistan growing up and in America as well. And so I always felt like I was stuck in this in between. And as an individual, navigating the world through the mixed experience. And I think as soon as I had more of a pivotal moment in my life where I was reevaluating, how I see myself as an individual and how I want to put forth my next, either venture, my next idea out into the world, and what that looks like as someone who is mixed. And within fashion, it's really all about perception, and everything in fashion is very visual. So for me, imagery and visuals in that sense were so important, and communicating something that wasn't fitting that Eurocentric lens of beauty, and redefining it on my own terms, and almost resetting that standard. And so when I was thinking about my next project, my next step with creating The Other, it was this idea stemmed from belonging and stemmed from that seeking belonging. And I found that belonging amongst other mixed people. And there's this inherent connection that I had with these individuals, that like, you get me and I get you, and we see each other for who we are. And there's that just baseline understanding and empathy. And it's, even though we come from different experiences and backgrounds and mixes, there's this connectiveness of like this space in between that we belong, the space that we don't belong elsewhere, we belong here. And so I've been interested in kind of exploring this in like kind of a story-esque way through The Other, and creating something visual, you know, for me, my form of art is through fashion, and how I think about my work. It's so inherently ingrained in me, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint, this is from my South Asian heritage and this is from, you know, my American identity or my Muslim identity. And because it's so layered and complex, like to Jesse's point, that's the thing I've been so interested in, this multi-dimensional self, because, you know, society tends to flatten one's identity and putting you in a box, putting you in that little label, clean, and there's one thing and you have to fit in that one box. But people aren't like that, especially those who are living in that mixed experience. You know, you can't just flatten a collective whole mixed identifying group, because we're so layered and complex with different experiences that are informing our journey, our thoughts, and our POVs that make it so unique. And through fashion, I feel like through both, not just the clothing, but the imagery, the storytelling, like not necessarily going along what has been done traditionally, but okay, how can we explore something new that hasn't yet really been done? And also through a lens where mindfulness and sustainability is also centered as a foundational baseline, because colonialism is linked to sustainability. And so by decolonizing fashion in my own way, I'm also thinking about giving back to the communities that are linked to my ancestors. And so, you know, that's really where it's all kind of connected in such a large macro way. But I kind of take my part as an individual coming from the South Asian diaspora. How can I elevate the perception and give value where it might not necessarily have been valuable to a, you know, a white centric standard.
Nyla, thank you so much for touching on that, and especially expanding upon a lot of non-mixed folks wanting to flatten mixed identity and put us into boxes. And I know we've talked about this with a group, as a group and individually, but a lot of non-mixed folks really want to easily digest our multiple identities, and then that's why they categorize us. And I think a lot of what Trinity and Jesse said also resonates with me as well. Of, if you read my name, it looks like Ami Scherson, and then I pop up, you're expecting a white woman, but here is this blonde, East Asian presenting Japanese Chilean woman. And so being able to bring this fullest identity is definitely something that I'm continuously navigating and changing. And so within my intro, I know I've totally forgot to mention this, but I am a musician by trade, classically trained, but now focusing more on singer-songwriting. I'm an arts administrator, facilitator, and community organizer. I'm also one of the co-founders of Mixt Collective. And so for me, artistic practice is continuously changing as my identity starts to change and as I begin to redefine it as well. And so earlier in my youth, because I presented more East Asian and because of my proximity to my Japanese culture and specifically my relationship to my mother, I never really presented as a Chilean or a Latinx identifying individual. And so as that is changing, I'm starting to see how that really is brought up within the art that I create. I think before, and I'll definitely talk about this more later, because of my classical training, I felt very rigid as the kind of work that I can create. And a lot of the music that I was playing and performing was by dead white men. And so now as I become older and start to navigate and think about the themes within my life as a mixed person of ancestry and generational trauma, my art is leaning towards writing and singer-songwriting, and then also creating space, facilitation that we could talk about these things together. And that's why I really appreciate Mixt, is that though, and this was mentioned by Trinity, we all have different lived experiences, without stating it, we kind of understand each other. And that's what's so beautiful about having a strong mixed community. Mixt and also M-I-X-T. Yes, I'll pass it off to Nexus.
Thank you. Trinity, something you shared resonated with me. Well, something everyone shared resonated with me, but particularly the language piece, right? Because I actually had a father who is Black, who I remember one of my earliest memories, I might have not even been in elementary school. I remember him discouraging my mom from teaching me Tagalog at the dinner table and kind of doing it jokingly, but but she stopped. And it's something that like at 40, I really want to. I'm also taking Duolingo and some other apps because I don't think Duolingo has Tagalog, but another one does. Anyway, so I'm trying to like reclaim that part of myself. And I think how my mixed identity informs my artistry is this interrogation of identity and community and the relationship between that. And I think particularly nothing specific to being Black and Filipino, but related to being mixed, seeing how fluid my identity is based on other people's perceptions. And like not my actual identity, but how I am perceived. And so I think that's really informed my storytelling because I think through storytelling and through performing kind of authentic narratives, it's a way to challenge people's assumptions. Like even just me sounding the way I do is challenging a lot of people's assumptions of like how a Black person sounds, how a Filipino person sounds, how a gay Black and Filipino person, like all the things, right? So I think it's really about, again, interrogating identity, storytelling, and just sharing one's own authentic voice. And even for people I work with who aren't mixed, digging into the intersectionality of their own identities, whatever that is, which means I generally don't work with cis white men because I'm just like, we don't need to interrogate that identity much at all. But yeah, so that's how it's informed like both what I do and who I collaborate with.
My goodness, thank you. This conversation is so good. I like, you know, it's like such a great dialogue, at least like when you feel that sense of belonging, when like the whole time you're like, like you just feel everything, all the feels. So we kind of jumped into this a little bit, and Nyla definitely has kind of given us a segue into this next question that I wanted to ask. And so as a polarized society here in the US, it's built on slavery, stolen ancestral lands, white supremacy. We're really ingrained centuries later as Americans in the US in colonization and colonialism. These very ideals are so steeped in white supremacy that sometimes like we so subconsciously and unconsciously just have these internalized beliefs that we have accepted, right, as to be true. But now I feel like, you know, people are starting to talk about it a little bit more. And I think that as artists, we are also buried deeply within these ideals. So although I would love to go into this conversation for like the rest of the remainder of time, because we totally could do that, and to even learn about your individual journeys. I wanted to just kind of start a little bit off in this. Now, I wanted to, shameless plug, mention a good portion of you have already had some of these conversations on our In the Mixt on Instagram. We have a series that Ami hosts. And then, so if you're watching this, please do visit our Instagram page at mixt.collective, so mixt.collective. And you can see some of these lovely folks having conversations about this. But Ami, my dearest co-founder, would you start us off in this question on what decolonization means to you in your artistic mindset and in your artistic practice, which I know you kind of started going on. So just go ahead, run with it.
Yeah, of course. Oh, this is such a good question. I'm like still marinating in it. I think for me, redefining and decolonizing artistic practice really comes from having a strong understanding of what tradition and history means within your artwork and your practice. And so I think I've mentioned this before. I was trained classically with piano, and then I've kind of strayed away from it. And though I have strong respect for classical music and also its practice, I really am also very interested in how it informs the art that we create in 2021, and also how we should center the voices of BIPOC individuals within the space as well. And so for me, playing classical music, I was reflecting a lot about white supremacy and the impacts of colonization, not only in classical music, but in many art forms. Like, for example, I've shared this before, but when I was in music school, I spent about one whole year on Bach, and world music was synthesized into one semester. And I remember when I had questioned this to one of my white male identifying professors, they, instead of being like, oh, you're right, we should definitely think about centering the curriculum towards BIPOC individuals and this larger breadth of classical music, it was, why are you questioning tradition? Why are you questioning history? This is the way that things were like. This is how it is. And I think I love seeing artists really push back on that notion. And that's definitely something that I am trying to do as a facilitator, as a community organizer and a musician, of how do we create space for individuals to be able to move forward with our artistic practices while centering our own stories. And so I'm really excited to be talking to Jesse, Nyla, and Nexus, who are doing that within their own practices. So I'll definitely share this question with y'all as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is Jesse speaking. Yeah, Ami, absolutely. And I want to also tag onto what you had shared at the end, where how can we allow artists of any medium the space to create work without filtering it for potentially what has been a more white centered culture. And so how do we allow that space for artists to do it without editing or filtering language or tailoring it for a specific culture or what has been. I also want to really acknowledge and share from one viewpoint for me, in which it stems from dancing and movement being action words. I also want to acknowledge that for me, decolonizing is a verb, and that it is an ing word, and I believe it should be, it's a process and action that needs work. It is tough work, but it needs to be done, and still can be done in 2050, in 2000, I was gonna say 2100, I mean, maybe 2100, but 2100, like allowing it to be a process that is continually of reevaluation, of re-acknowledgement, but an ing word, rather than, okay, now the space is decolonized. Because then the work that it's finished, and is it really, and is the viewpoint so static at that point? So I really want, just for me, my perspective, that it is really a verb, it's an action, it is a continual process. It's an ing word.
I love that, Jesse. I think that definitely relates to the part of like where I'm at. And I mentioned I'm with a playwriting collective, and I'm producing original work that's both going to be combined storytelling and dance theater through a devised ensemble process. And so for me, part of what decolonizing has meant, and I think what, at least I know the theater community in DC is really asking ourselves, is one, who gets to create the art, but also where is theater? Because theater isn't just something that happens in buildings. And also related to this, and maybe we can talk about this more later, I feel like I haven't had a conversation about decolonization without also addressing the nonprofit industrial complex and how that's actually an oppressive system of institutions, the way it's set up, and very much supports white supremacy the way it currently is. But so for me, decolonizing is very much about the people and the space. And so I'm really excited because I've committed already to not using an established theater space for my production. I want to find something that's like, I don't know, maybe in a parking lot, maybe in a park. I want to build a stage and then burn it. That's part of like some of the things I get from Burning Man in terms of like, we like to burn things when we're done with it. But I think it's also informed by, I was involved with a storytelling organization here, which has been some of the most fulfilling theater I've participated in as an audience member, as a storyteller myself. And it was regularly done by people who weren't performers. They were everyday people living in the city that had a story to tell. And it was performed at a gay bar here in DC that was like a rental for a night. And it was theater, and it was amazing, fulfilling theater. There was a community there that like hung out before and talked. And it was actually giving me a lot of what I wanted from my other theatrical experiences, and I realized I wasn't getting. So I'm trying to figure out a way to bring that all together. I don't know, maybe it'll be in a bar. But so like for me, decolonizing is like really challenging the notion of what a theater space is. And I'm really excited, and hopefully I'll keep y'all updated.
So I'm going to jump in quickly. I'm going to acknowledge everything that's been said. It's like so much. I want to like rewind and like press play, like the nonprofit industrial complex. Oh my God, such a real thing. And like I'm in that space now as an executive director for an arts nonprofit now. And I'm just like living all of that Nexus. So like such another conversation. And then even like, you know, I also work a lot with visual arts, and I'm working currently in public art. And that's something that I'm trying to redefine as being true to the word accessibility, right? Because, you know, as soon as there's a building, there's a barrier. So that goes for a theater, that goes for a museum, that goes for a dance, you know, a performing arts venue, places where concert halls, like all of those things, once you put a building there, that now means that there is a barrier. And and a lot of times we're not looking at those marginalized folks in those communities. And we have to start really looking at that, because that really is seeped into all of this superstructure of capitalism, right? So there was something that Nyla had said earlier in her response to the earlier question about how colonialism is like the response of sustainability. And I just wanted you to expand a little bit more on that, since we're talking about decolonization and colonialism.
Absolutely. So it is sustainability and decolonization. It's a loaded thing within fashion, and there's multiple layers within it. As a designer working in the global north, I think about it in several ways. My supply chain, who am I creating for? And, you know, what can I change within the system that exists at the moment by decentering the white, Eurocentric white standard of beauty? And so when I've been thinking about my own work, honestly, it is like an internal ingrained thing for, I think, most of us who are in the BIPOC mixed experience, where it's constantly acknowledging, you know, who are we creating for? We are decentering the white experience, and, you know, really talking to the people who we want to talk to, the people who have been wanting and needing, you know, the representation to widen the narrative within fashion, especially because that's where these standards are really, you know, implemented. And so when I've been thinking about my own work within fashion, I want to create a generative space, a space where others like me, living in a like-minded kind of space, whether they're mixed or not, for us to amplify each other's voices. Because, you know, in fashion, the Eurocentric standard is usually the standard that is given value to certain brands, certain concepts, certain people within the industry. And so for myself, I'm actively working against, not necessarily against it, but I'm like not following that path, because that path isn't made for people like us, the majority of non-white folks. But then when I've been thinking about the supply chain and how it's so deeply rooted within colonialism, I've been really deep diving into what does that mean in the South Asian diaspora, in the Far East, like in these countries that have been oppressed, have been colonized, and how can we break free of that? And even colonialism within fashion exists still. So in the ways that, you know, it's technically called surrogate colonialism, which is the extraction of resources, extraction of labor, exploitation of labor. And so I've been thinking about how do I create a environment and work with partners in the South Asian diaspora, in India specifically at the moment, and creating fair trade, fair wages, and an environment where they're feeling valued. And I want to learn about each individual that works on each piece that I create with them, in collaboration with them. And so, you know, in coming to like working in the diaspora as well, like in India specifically, you know, there's complexity within my own experience being Pakistani. And even within my own family, being married to a Bengali man, where Pakistanis and Bangladesh, or like Pakistan and Bangladesh, had their own war as well, like after the British left. So really digging into the roots and really trying to pay homage to my heritage in the appropriate way. And and acknowledging the complexities even within the South Asian diaspora, where I can't even flatten that because there is so much depth within that part of the region as well. So I've been really breaking down each piece of my own identity, how I see myself as a designer, and the system that I'm working within, that I'm trying to remove myself from actively. And, it's like Jesse said, it's an active, constant thing that we're working towards. It's not necessarily going to be all done. And sustainability and decolonization go hand in hand. And so I can't ignore that. It's not a trend. It is just a part of, acknowledging where we've come in fashion in the consumer world, and where we need to really be thinking about, where are our products made? Who made them? Were they paid fairly? Were they treated fairly? So, for me, a lot of that goes into, as a consumer as well, is what am I buying? What am I putting my value, what am I investing in? Am I investing in someone's livelihood who's really going to benefit? Is this, or is this going to be something that becomes wasteful, which is also a product of colonization, waste? So, just, I can really go on and on about this, but I just wanted to touch upon those few points within the work that I do, and how to actively kind of push the narrative forward. And it's not just, a trend or of the now. It is a necessity.
Thank you so much. I think I recently told you that I'm so blown by the process and how you make it so visible for us. And as a former recovering education administrator, I think it's really important to make that process visible, because I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are just kind of like buying a product, or, or viewing a product, or being an audience member, but they're not really seeing the injustices that are happening on a daily basis in order for that to actually come to fruition. Or they're not seeing, like what Nexus talked about earlier with the nonprofit industrial complex. Oh, I'm giving to a really good cause. But what does that actually mean, and whose lives are at stake, and who is that pushing out in the conversation? All of these things really need to bubble up. And it's kind of a great segue into our talking about intersectionality. So I do want to just remind, we have a couple questions left. And so for this question, I would really love for two of y'all to talk about it. And to preface it with, a lot of the dialogue that we are creating in this space right now is centered around intersectionality. I know that word, a lot of times people don't maybe understand fully or grasp the definition. I kind of came up with a loose way of defining it for now for time constraints, but it's the many facets that gives to all of our layers that define us within our society along the lines of power and privilege, right? So all of these intersections make up who we are. And giving to the idea of, in a prior conversation that I had with most of y'all, in some of your own words, quoting, immediately our identities get flattened or versus multidimensional. Our environmental factors and support systems can define us. The uniqueness that mixed racial identities give us in navigating the world, sense of community on your identity paths, and always told we're not enough. So Nyla, if you can start off this conversation and talk just a little tiny bit about a term that I think you coined, not sure, called code flexing, and then Ami can jump in. So.
Yes, code flexing is a term that I coined, and it's an alternative perspective and way of existing as opposed to code switching. So I've been thinking about my own identity and how it's not fragmented. I'm not a fragmented individual. I am one whole person, and the multiple layers of identity flex through me, through the different spaces that I exist. And so I've been thinking about it in a way where, well, why can't I control my narrative in the way that I show up into a space seamlessly as I want to claim, whatever part of my identity I want to emphasize. And so instead of code switching, where you're kind of put into an environment to conform, you're code flexing, where you are showing up as you are, flexing the different aspects of your identity fluidly, and it's owning who you are more fully and feeling more empowered by how you show up in the different spaces that you exist. And I've really thought about that in the clothing that I've designed, and how I even style my own self, and how I want to be represented, or how I want to present myself rather, in the different spaces that I exist. And so code flexing is something that I felt like really embodied this idea of owning the mixed experience, owning that more fully, and being in control of your own perception, like almost like bridging the inner and outer self, like together in a more holistic, harmonious way. And that's something where I feel like it feels much more empowering versus, oh, I need to conform to this environment and dress a certain way and speak a certain way and, alter myself to cater towards someone else, to comfort them, versus this is who I am and I am showing up as I am.
Retweeting all of that, Nyla. I love your introduction to like the term of code flexing, and we've had some opportunities to talk about this further in some projects that we'll share later in the conversation. But for me, when you first spoke about code flexing, it really pushed forward that identity is fluid, and we're able to navigate it as we see comfort and depending on the spaces that we take up. So I think for me, that is also manifested in the way that I present in front of Chilean identifying individuals are very different from Japanese identifying individuals, or folks who are monoracial versus mixed race. And I think within code flexing, it's also being able to really explore the intersections of your identity, not only your mixed identities, but the other intersections. So for example, my religious background, my father is a Jewish identifying individual, and my mom practices a Shinto sect called Tsukyo Mahikari. And so how those religious influences impact my life and my identity within my Japanese and Chilean experiences are very different than maybe other Japanese and Chilean people. And so being able to navigate that, I think, allows more clarity in how I view my own identity and how I connect with other people through code flexing. So I love the term. I hope that it gets used more because it's really beautiful and kind of pinpointing that experience.
Thank you so much, both of you. There's so many things I have written down, like notes, like I'm not on Twitter, so I can't retweet anything, Ami. So I'm going to move into our last question, and it's a heavy one. And Nexus is going to take us out on this one, but as a way into, and kind of it's speaking a lot to things that Jesse was talking about, how like things are actionable, right? Like the ing, not, why do we have such viewpoints that are so static, right? Like even being anti-racist, that's an action, right? It's not just like, oh, well, I took, a couple of these courses and now I'm anti-racist. This is not how it works, right? So as a way into an anti-racist actionable lens and having key proponents such as equity, inclusion, diversity, and as such, we are now talking a little bit more about ideologies visited decades ago in liberation, right? So many artistic practices lean really heavily on tradition, a binary approach. It's good versus bad. Who are we creating our art for? So how do we have the outcome of bringing art to the communities? How do we disrupt the system in not being palatable only to white people? And like, who does it speak to? Or even being monoracial, even if we get down the nitty gritty of what does mixed race look like? What are we supposed to look like, right? Like that even comes into it. And just breaking down a lot of these assumptions. So Nexus, if you can talk in a little bit about what ways you're currently working towards liberation and decentering whiteness within your artistic communities.
Sure. I think, okay, the Cliff Notes. because this work is intersectional, right? We can't talk about decentering whiteness without talking about combating transphobia, misogyny, ableism. And so I think part of what I've, especially over the past summer and a kind of event I produced with some friends that I've been in community with, the through line was, how can we struggle against fear and shame? How can we work to build up a resiliency to conflict? And how can we create an abundant space to name harm and hold each other accountable when we experiencing harm, or when we perpetuate harm? And so what this has looked like practically is, when we had an event, we didn't just ask people in a feedback form, did you experience harm at our event because of identities you held and in relationship to others? We even asked people that before. We were like, hey, are there people that are going to be here that are going to make it challenging for you to be present, and how can we support you? So by creating this abundance of space, we're hoping to really practically address the ways in which our unconscious bias comes across, which whiteness shows up, and to not be afraid of naming it and not to be afraid of conflict, because I think that's the thing that I feel like has held me back in my own personal journey to liberation, is I often don't have a way to talk about it. I don't have collaborators willing to hold me or other people accountable. And so it really hopefully gets to the heart of something that I think is universal for people who hold marginalized identities, whether you're mixed, whether you're queer, whether you're trans and non-binary. So yeah, it's really setting up places to create an abundance of space to name harm and to hold each other accountable, and to try to fight against the binary of, there are people who hurt and there are people who get hurt. No, we've all been hurt, and we've all hurt other people. And so if we just start from there, I think that's a huge way that I found I've been decentering whiteness in my own practice and community.
Hi, this is Jesse speaking. I can jump in. Thank you, Nexus, for sharing that. I will just let that sit for a bit. I can also bring a perspective in how I've been kind of trying to liberate and decentralize whiteness. Within my contemporary dance company, we just created a new, well, we're in post-production for a dance film, but we just created a new work called Invisible, with a dash in between, and kind of discussing the very stereotypical sense that the Asian culture, Japanese culture, I have felt has been invisible, where it's very primarily black and white centric. And within that work, I was thinking, who can I invite into the space to really have a deep conversation about this? And within this, I found that I needed to have a cast or a crew of all AAPI identifying artists to really be able to feel that personal connection. And someone had mentioned beforehand the empathy into that. And so I really found that, and actually with that, we were able to have a much deeper conversation to start out because of that communal empathy into this topic that we were going to dive into. And so it would be very different if we had a different cast of a different ethnicity or a different background. And so I'm trying to be in my space, and I'm being super mindful of what experiences am I bringing into, or how I'm curating a company or a different organizations and things like that. I also want to share sort of briefly is to really, I am acknowledging where I'm putting my energy into, whether as an arts administrator, as an advocate, as a supporter, where am I donating towards? Like, what energy, where am I putting my energy towards? And for me personally, I am bringing energies into organizations that prioritize BIPOC individuals, and organizations that and I work very closely as a board member as well with this organization called Diversity of Dance, where it's not just diversity within the movement language. I mean, within, like Ami had touched upon this very briefly, like very more classical forms of dancing, but really all of the movement languages, but also diversity in what body types or experiences and things like that. And so I bring that up. Well, also to share that within Give Me Company, someone had shared that with Give Me Company, we are a constellation of our world. And so I invite us really to think about that in where we put our energies. I invite us all, whether you're participating, listening, whatnot, we're here together. to invite us all to think about where you put your energies, where do you put your time and effort, emotional efforts, financial effort, physical effort. Where do you put your yourself, your full self into? What communities do you do that to? And so I invite us to think about that, because that is a continual process that I'm doing to decentralize whiteness and to have liberation for marginalized communities.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you so much, Nexus. There are a couple of things that really sat with me really well, that landed super well. And I want to just elevate quickly to, like, you know, some things that I heard from those responses, which is like intentionalizing what you do, how you spend your time. I think the pandemic has really spotlighted that for a lot of us. Even the Great Resignation is happening, that they coined it now. Like, people are just, what do I do with my time? And I want to be more mindful about that, right? And then two, something that really hit hard, Nexus, was when you talked about we've all hurt people and we've all been hurt. There's no us versus them here, right? There's no binary feeling. There's so many layers to that. And we're all guilty of it, but we're all like, you know, and it's not to like compete and compare always. I think that's capitalism, right? That's exactly what's ingrained in us, is that competitive thing. Like, well, I'm darker skinned, so I've had it worse off than you. It at that point, nothing really moves forward collectively, right? And so I really love that. I'm going to be sitting in that for a while, but acknowledging the pain, the trauma, and the way that we need to move forward collectively stronger. So I'm gonna close this out. I'm going to give each of you 1 minute to, or less, if you could, to just talk about yourself and take up that space, and how folks can follow you. This has been an amazing conversation. I can't wait to have individual one-on-ones with each of you after this. I'm going to start us off by just quickly saying that as the co-founder of Mixt Collective, along with Ami Scherson on here, we have a lot of really cool things coming up for Mixt Collective. Like I said, we're in infancy, but we have some things that Ami can even talk a little bit more to. And then personally, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm pretty active. It's Tara_Trinity with 5 Ys. And I'm just not going to take up any more space, and I'll just move into Ami. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, Trinity, thank you so much for moderating us and holding space. It's been a phenomenal conversation, and I love chatting with you all individually and as a group. You can follow me at Ami Tamar Santo on Instagram, AmiTamarSanto, and then you can also follow us on Mixt Collective, mixt.collective. Within the Mixt Collective space, I host a interview series called In the Mixt, where we speak to mixed race identifying artists and creators. And so if you're interested in tuning in or even being part of the series, you can contact us via Instagram or email. And we also have a really exciting event that's coming up alongside Nyla and the other on September 28th that she could touch on a little bit. But we always have different events. We always have newsletters coming out every other month. So please join part of our Mixt community. I'll pass it off to Jesse.
Thanks so much. This is Jesse speaking. I have a website. It's www.myfullname, which is actually on this side of the screen, .com. And then also you can follow me on Instagram, with is Jesse_Obremski, JESSE_OBREMSKI. And on there, I have a link tree and other spaces that you can connect to. And yeah, I want to also thank Mixt Collective, and also thank Ma'am Fest for having this conversation, this generative space to move forward. I feel very energized and grounded while still flying high, and to move forward. I'll pass it to Nexus.
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. So you can follow my personal social media accounts at A Way of Life 0. That's the number 0. A Way of Life 0 on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you want to follow the playwriting work, I mentioned I'm a part of a collective. The neat thing about this collective called the Welders in DC is that there's 6 of us, but we're the 3rd group to manage it. And after we've all produced a show, we pass it on to another one. So follow it through May and maybe keep up with it later. But it's the Welders. You can find it at Welders DC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I also do some anti-racism consulting work where I do talk a lot about the nonprofit sector, the art sector, and lately I've been watching Big Brother because the cookout is a thing. So you can follow that at Ask Dear Nexus on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And looking forward to talking to my fellow panelists and moderators more about all the things, and anyone else who might be interested in collaborating creatively in person or virtually. I'm going to pass it on to Nyla.
Thank you, Nexus. Thank you, Mixt Collective. Thank you, MAM Festival. This has been a really inspiring conversation amongst you all, and it just reinforces like my purpose. And I feel so incredibly strongly about, you know, the intersection of art, creating impact, and expressing identity through my work. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but I recently launched The Other this month. And thank you. And and it's available to purchase. It's all made to order. And you know, this is a startup, so I'm working with some amazing resources in India, and I'm totally available for questions regarding the product or regarding the work I'm doing. And my Instagram, my personal Instagram is my name at Nyla Hasan. And the other Instagram is the_other 0THER. And the website where you can check out my vision and the product is theother-collection.com. And I also wanted to quickly plug on September 28th, I'm partnering with the Mixt Collective on a really special event where I'll be talking about the other in much deeper conversation regarding identity, regarding fashion, and also we're featuring a few amazing mixed performers and artists who will be performing at the event and or showing their work as well. And you can follow me and the Mixt Collective to get more details. And if you're interested in being invited or signing up, just keep a lookout, as well as like you can sign up for my newsletter, and I will also be you know, letting everyone know on that platform as well. Thanks again. It was so nice to chat with all of you. This is really, really invigorating.
Yay, I think it's a wrap. Thanks so much, Mixt Asian Media Festival, for giving us this platform. We're just so beyond, and I definitely don't want to speak for Ami, but I'm pretty sure she feels the same. We did not even expect like Mixt Collective to kind of turn into what it has been turning into in such a short period of time. But honestly, it's because of the people who are involved in our community. So we're as strong as our community, and we're really, really grateful to all of you. So we're hoping that everyone who joined in and listened to this got something out of it. I sure did, and I have a lot that I'm going to be marinating in. So thanks again to all of you.